Imagine building the largest structures on Earth without a single coin ever changing hands. No wallets, no banks, no cash registers. And yet, for 3,000 years, longer than the gap between us and Julius Caesar, one civilization ran a fully functioning economy this way. Pyramids went up, armies were fed, temples grew richer than kings, all without money as we know it. So, how do you run an empire with zero currency? The answer is stranger and smarter than you'd think. Ancient Egypt wasn't a marketplace economy. It was a flow economy. Picture a giant wheel. Grain and goods moved in from farms as taxes, funneled into state and temple granaries, and then flowed right back out again as wages, rations, and building materials. The pharaoh sat at the center of that wheel, not as a shopkeeper, but as the keeper of balance itself. There was no need for a bank because the granary basically was the bank. And that's where the real genius kicks in. Egypt's actual currency wasn't metal, it was food, specifically grain, emmer wheat and barley, measured out in standardized sacks called kar. A laborer might be paid several sacks of emmer and barley a month, deposited straight from royal storehouses. It sounds informal, but it wasn't. Egypt legislated the exact size of these measures. One pharaoh, Horemheb, actually passed a law punishing officials who used rigged, undersized measuring containers to cheat farmers out of their fair ration. That's not primitive bookkeeping. That's consumer protection 3,000 years early. But grain alone couldn't price everything. A coffin isn't worth some sacks of wheat. So the Egyptians invented something clever, the Deben, not a coin, a unit of weight based on copper, silver, or gold that let you put a number on anything without ever touching the metal itself. Here's the wild part. We have the receipts, literally. Workers at a village called Deir el-Medina left behind thousands of scraps of limestone recording their trades. One survives listing a coffin priced at roughly 25 Deben, paid for not in metal, but with a pig, some goats, and a couple of logs of sycamore wood. Another values an entire ox this way, settled purely in staff, jars of honey, and household goods. Not 1 gram of metal exchanged. It was pricing everything like a currency while paying for nothing like one. This same logic built the pyramids. The workers weren't slaves in chains, that's a myth. They were organized crews, conscripted through a system called corvée labor, mostly during the Nile flood season, when farming was impossible anyway. In return, the state fed them bread, beer, meat, housing. It worked beautifully until it didn't. Around 1159 BCE, under Ramesses III, the state's grain deliveries fell 18 days behind, and the workers at Deir el-Medina did something no one had ever recorded before. They walked off the job. The first labor strike in human history, not over wages, but because the rations stopped showing up, proof that even a moneyless economy could suffer its own version of a paycheck bouncing. None of this worked without paperwork. Temples weren't just religious sites, they owned farmland, cattle, ships, and workshops, functioning as economic powerhouses in their own right. And behind every transaction stood the scribe, measuring grain, logging debts, recording every jar of beer and every day of absence. In a world with no currency, the ledger was the trust. If it was written down, it was real. So why did it eventually fall apart? Simple. The world around Egypt started using money and started demanding it. As foreign trade grew and Greek mercenaries entered Egyptian service, they wanted to be paid in something they could spend anywhere, silver. The system held for centuries, but it was quietly cracking, until the Greek-ruled Ptolemaic dynasty finally introduced full coinage. Centuries after the pyramids were already ancient history to the Egyptians themselves. For 3,000 years, an entire civilization thrived on grain, weight, and written trust instead of cash. And it makes you wonder how much of what we call money today is really just an agreement we've all decided to believe in.